Be continuing in James, which we've been working on. We are past the halfway point. We're closing out the third chapter today. This week, I was thinking a little bit, and one of the things that is a modern phenomenon is the idea of binge watching TV. That you can just put something on and let it just roll all day long until Netflix insults you by saying, "Are you still there?" You're like, "Yes, stop judging me." Now, here's the thing. I am not much of a TV binger. I do like movies, especially ones that I liked when I was a little kid, but I don't watch a lot of TV. And if you ask my family, does Jeremy ever watch a bunch of TV shows? Most of the time they would say no, but there is one exception that I have in my life. There is a show that I will get sucked into, and I will let roll for multiple episodes at a time sometimes, and that show is Gold Rush. I know. This baffles my family because they do like TV shows. They will watch shows, and they cannot believe that this is the one that I will get. But look at those guys. Don't they look compelling? Episode after episode will just play. And Rachel has said to me, my wife has said to me, "What do you like about this show? I can't understand it. It is literally the exact same thing happening every single episode. They push dirt, the water hose blows up, they got to get it into the sluice box, and then they get some gold." Now, if you watch Gold Rush, you go, "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." And I'm not 100% sure what it is about this show that intrigues me. But I do think that I might have figured it out. It's that there's a 6-year-old boy who lives inside me that likes when big tractors push dirt. That's really what it is. Look at the size of that bulldozer. Did you see how much dirt that they moved? And at the end of the episode, I always am excited to see how many ounces of gold they pulled out of the dirt. I'm also always amazed at how nonchalant people are about pulling $1 million of gold out of the dirt in a week like it was no big deal. And this is the other thing that I'm always compelled by when I watch the show. We will throw our whole lives after what we determine to be the most valuable. If you watch these guys, they live in hovels for 8 months of the year and work 18 hours a day pushing dirt in order to pull the smallest amount of gold out of that dirt so that they can get rich. That's the appeal, and I understand it because it really taps into something in the human heart that says when we see something with value, when we decide that this will provide something we need, we will throw everything we have at it. The thing about the text that we're going to work on today is it reflects a biblical virtue that tells us what is the most valuable thing in the world that you should throw your whole life at. It gives us the answer to that question. And here's what it says in the Psalms, or in the Proverbs actually. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to gain insight rather than silver. And yet I have not seen a television show called Wisdom Hunters. It's not very popular. They don't get a budget for that. I had 6 or 7 Proverbs that all said something along these lines, and I realized this really just gets to the heart of it. The most valuable thing that you can pursue with your life is wisdom, is insight, is understanding. And yet I don't know how many people in my life do I see throwing their whole existence into pursuing wisdom. I want to start, we're only doing about 5 verses today, but I actually want to start, I'm going to use the end as our beginning. Because the very last word that James uses in James chapter 3 is a significant word because it is the thing that will aim us to what we're trying to get at. If you have your Bible open, you can cheat and figure out what that word is. It's the very last word of the chapter. And I think it's important to talk about it because it's a common word in church circles that is often misunderstood. And if James says you have to order your whole life to chase this most valuable thing and we miss what it's going to produce, I think we will struggle. Here's what the last word of James chapter 3 says: righteousness. Now, if you've been around church or if you've been around Bible environments or if you've been in religious organizations, you maybe have heard the word righteous. But the reality is this is a super common word in environments like this and not a word that's almost ever used outside of this environment. Like I'm guessing at work this week, you're probably not going to have a meeting talking about righteousness. And if I said even to you who have been around the church, hey, what is righteousness? I think people would struggle to get an answer. And if you came up with one, I would guess it would probably sound something like, well, God is righteous. Now, that doesn't help us define what righteousness is, but it does say where it comes from. It comes from God. And the reason it's important for us to talk about this idea of righteousness is because what James is going to say is when you aim your life after the thing that we should be aiming after, it's going to produce something that is called righteousness. What is it? Yes, God is righteous, but that just means he defines the standard of what is right. So what is righteous living? Righteous living is living in right relationship with God, with others, my neighbor, and with all of creation. Righteousness means living honestly, faithfully, and justly. See, we can say God is righteous because God is the definition of honest. All truth comes from him and is defined by him. We can say God is righteous because he is always faithful. He always follows through. His promises always deliver. We can say that God is righteous because he is the just one and the thing against which we measure all justice. But when we say you should be righteous, then we have to apply it and say, what does that look like? It means that we will be living in the way of God under his guidance. It means that your life will be in harmony with him, with your neighbor, with all he has made. It means that we will be a people who live honestly, faithfully, and justly. That's the thing we're going to be aiming at. Or as James says it, and we've been saying this every week, James says the purpose of his letter, the reason he's writing to the church, the reason we're studying it now is so it will produce in us what he uses as this Greek word teleos, wholeness, completeness, perfection, righteousness. That our whole self, what we think, what we feel, what we speak, and what we do aligns in the goodness that God has defined. And he tells us that wisdom is the key to this thing. I like board games. I was at a Christmas party in December, and at the party, one of the questions that we had to answer is, what do you like to do in your free time? And my answer is, I like to play board games by myself. Now, you can laugh, and you probably should. But there is a reality when somebody asks me my hobbies. I have a few. One of them is board games. And then they will say, almost inevitably, someone will say, I love board games. Here's what I know. I'm a way bigger nerd than you. So when you say that, I immediately employ a silent board game test, which I just ask a couple questions. And it's not because you're going to have a wrong answer. It's just going to determine like, how big of a dork am I compared to you? And so I will say, what's the last board game you'd played? And then they will answer. Or I will say, what's your favorite board game? And like I said, there is no wrong answer, but there is a reality when the question is asked, I know what the score is. And so when I say, what's your favorite board game? And you say Monopoly, okay, I lied, there is a wrong answer. That's it. If you say Monopoly, I go, okay, I get it. Because I'm deep in this hobby. All it's doing is helping something that's kind of a nebulous statement. I like board games, so do I. And then I can ask a couple clarifying questions that go, okay, so how are we defining this? What's the last game you played? Chutes and Ladders. Cool, great. Got it. And James gives us the board game test for wisdom. Here's what he says. Who is wise and understanding among you? I just want to stop right there. Because if you're in a room this size with all of you, and I say, who is wise and understanding among you? There are two responses in the room. Those of you who are confident enough to go, I am wise and understanding, and others of you who go, I am too humble, or at least falsely humble, to say I am wise or understanding, but I am really wise and understanding. Like, who goes, no, I'm ignorant and stupid. Like, everybody thinks that they are wise and understanding. That's just the reality. So who among you is wise or understanding? Now, here's the test. How do we know? Everybody thinks that they're wise and understanding. Nobody walks around intentionally being an idiot. It just doesn't happen. But how do we know? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. That's how we're going to know. That's the test. If everyone thinks that they're wise and everyone thinks that they are understanding, how do we determine who is truly wise and who is truly understanding? We will know it by the deeds that come out of their life that are born out of humility that comes from wisdom. That's what we're looking for. Because that's the bar. That's the measuring stick. And that's the challenge that we have. Wisdom is weighed by the action it produces. James went on and on in the last chapter saying, you can't claim to have faith and yet have nothing come out of your life that faith produces, because that kind of faith isn't real. It's dead. It's false. Likewise, you can't claim to be wise. You can't claim to have understanding. You can't claim to have the answers to the biggest problems in the world if your life does not produce action that looks like wisdom. Because that's the measuring stick. What is your life producing? He says, here's one of the things that can come out of our lives. If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it or deny the truth. One of the things that's so interesting about James is that James was written almost 2,000 years ago to a culture and a language and a people that is very foreign to us. And that comes from people who spend a lot of time thinking about those days, that culture, that language. It's still very foreign to us. So I would suppose that as James writes this, he probably has some people in mind. He knows who those bitter, envious people are, and he knows those people that are pursuing selfish ambition as he's writing about it. And here's the thing, it almost doesn't matter who he's talking about, because here 2,000 years later I go, oh, I know bitter envy and selfish ambition. I know those people, because those people are me. What are those things? It's probably helpful if we define these terms. He says, bitter envy, selfish ambition, what are they? Bitter envy is the toxic blend. I found this quote online. It's the toxic blend of desire and resentment. So envy is I want something I don't have. Bitter envy is the resentment that comes towards the people who have the thing that I wish that I had. I grew up in rural North Dakota. My family and my wife's family were dedicated Minnesota Vikings fans. Yeah. Yay. We had bitter envy towards the Green Bay Packers. It's just the reality, because they had good quarterbacks. We did not. They won Super Bowls. We did not. And if anything good happened to that terrible team, I was upset about it. How dare they? And now I can joke about it, because who cares? It's sportsdom. I mean, part of the game is pretending you care more than you actually do. That's welcome to being a fan, right? But don't we see this in our own life? Don't we see people who have things we want? They have more money than we have. They look better than we have. They have more influence than we have. They have more power than we have. And we want to see them fall. We wish that they would fail. Maybe you don't experience that in your life. I see it all the time in the political world. If you're on this side of the aisle, you look at that side and you go, I can't stand those dirtbags over there. And when they lose an election or screw it up, I'm going to be so happy in my heart. And if you're on that side of the aisle, you say the exact same thing to the other people. Bitter envy motivates us in the way we feel towards each other in the world. Isn't this what social media's entire structure is built around? Comparing yourself to other people? Well, it also helps you with selfish ambition, because selfish ambition prioritizes your personal gain over the well-being of others. It doesn't mean just that you're doing well or just that you want to achieve great things. That's ambition. Selfish ambition means when it becomes the goal of your life and it doesn't matter who you step on to get there. And James is just being really honest. Don't we all have bitter envy and selfish ambition somewhere in our hearts? And then he tells us there are two dangers in dealing with that truth. We'll call them the twin failures of dealing with bitter envy or selfish ambition: to deny or boast. The first one is to say, I don't feel that at all. I never experience that. I don't have that. I never have any selfish ambition. I never have bitter envy towards anyone. If you deny it, you can't deal with it. If you deny it, it actually starts growing. It's mold underneath your kitchen counter that you just closed the cabinet and walked away. It didn't solve the problem. You just pretended it wasn't there, and now it's growing. And it's gaining in power and danger. I don't know if mold's that bad, but it seems like it would be. The second one is actually one that we see all the time, is boasting about it. So one side acknowledges this probably isn't good. It's probably not good for me. It's probably not good for my neighbor. It's probably not good for our culture. So therefore, I'm going to admit that I don't have it. The other one says, who cares that it's bad? Let's actually revel in it. Let's boast in it. Let's actually tell each other that it's winsome and good to chase selfish ambition and bitter envy. That's the one that I go, man, that feels like our culture loves to rally around boasting about selfish ambition and envy. And James says if you do either of those things, you're not dealing with the actual problem. In fact, he says that such wisdom, and he puts scare quotes around it, doesn't come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Now, if there's anything that you want to say about James, I think you could say that James is direct. If you wanted to say something else about James, I think you could say sometimes he's a little dramatic. And here is James getting a little dramatic. I mean, let's be honest. He's talking about very common feelings that people have. Sometimes I'm envious. Sometimes it brings out bitterness. Sometimes I want things for myself at the cost of others. And you're calling it demonic? Like, calm down, buddy. Well, James is just riffing off his own writing. It was just a couple chapters ago where he said everything good comes down from the Father out of heaven. And here he's saying, here's something that's being presented to the people of God as good, as wisdom, but don't be mistaken. This is actually coming from below. It is not spiritual. It's demonic. We just got to pause for a second because demonic is not a word that we use very often. And if anybody does use it, it's just like, whoa, calm down. I know the guy is a serial killer, but demonic? Overstating it a little bit? And the reason it's important to just pause on demonic is because we have to understand what demonic is. It means it is coming from Satan, the father of lies. The thing about demonic that's such a powerful word, and I think we actually should use it more, is demonic means that it is using destruction and deception to mislead. Oh, well, destructive and deceptive, oh, okay. You can call me destructive and deceptive all you want, but don't call me demonic. This is what Luther says about it. The devil is the master of the art of deception. He can make truth appear to be falsehood and falsehood appear to be truth. And so when James says, bitter envy and selfish ambition are offered to you as wisdom, and you have to be careful because that wisdom comes from below, it is unspiritual, and it is divisive, destructive, and deceptive. It's demonic. We better take it pretty seriously then, because I don't think he's being dramatic. I think he's being accurate. This is what he's getting at. There is false wisdom in the world that aims to deceive you. See, demonic wisdom isn't operating outside of forces. There is evil in the world. Satan is at work, and he uses lies and deception to trick us, to deceive us. And some of that deception comes in the form of wisdom. I had this picture taken last week. I think I look quite nice in it. That's Charles Spurgeon. He has got to be my great-great-uncle or something. This is what he says about it. He says, discernment is not simply a matter of telling the difference between what's right and wrong. Rather, it's telling the difference between right and almost right. I mean, this is the trick, right? The earliest lie we ever see in the Bible is when Satan approaches Adam and Eve and uses partial truth to say, didn't God say this to you? And he misrepresents God in a way that appears to be almost true. It's almost good. If all we had to do was figure out what was right and right sat over there and wrong stood over there, it ain't that hard. We can figure it out. The problem is, Satan is clever, and what he produces for us is something that looks really close to being right. And so discernment is trying to measure between those two things. And here's the reason why it's so important, because he says, when you have envy and selfish ambition in your heart and in your community, there you will find every disorder and evil practice. The question of what in the heck is wrong with the world is answered for you right here. What is wrong in the world? We harbor envy and selfish ambition at the cost of our neighbor, and we deny that it exists, and we boast in it when it shows up. That's what's wrong in the world. We can elaborate on how that works itself out, but the reality is it comes from these base things within us, lies that we've believed, that we've been tempted to call wisdom, and we've either promoted or denied, and it brings about sin and disorder and destruction and evil in the world. Man, all right, well, we better be serious about this then. Like, we better listen up. If that's where we're going, what do we do about it? Because wisdom is weighed by the action it produces. So if the wisdom that we're cuddling up to, if the wisdom we're warming up to, if the wisdom we're starting to be tempted to inhabit is bringing about disorder and evil, it ain't wisdom. I had some time this week to spend in one of my favorite places in the world, the Superstition Wilderness. If you are an Arizona person, or if you're newer to the state, if you've never spent any time out in the Superstitions, I would just encourage you to go on some hikes. It's a beautiful place. And one of my family's favorite spots is a little off-trail place. You go on a regular trail, and then you shoot off into Lower Barks Canyon. In fact, that's a picture of my two boys a couple years ago when they were younger. We were on a little backpacking trip, off-trail down the canyon. It was not this year because there's water in that picture. It is very dry out there right now. The first time I ever was out there, Rachel, my wife, and I took our son Asher. He was probably 7 at the time, and we did this little adventure. We took the day, we packed a little lunch, and we walk on the trail, and then you come down into the canyon, and then we're like, now we're off trail. We're just going down the canyon. And we hike for maybe a half mile, and we come across a pool, something like this, and that pool is surrounded by sand, damp sand that's there. And you have a 7-year-old, he's throwing rocks and he's picking stuff up and poking at things. And I'm standing there looking at the sand. And I was like, Rachel, you ever heard about the Lost Dutchman's gold? She's like, no. I was like, well, there's a legend that in the Superstitions, there's these extremely wealthy gold mines that we've lost and haven't found. There was this Dutchman who used to come out here and he'd mine, and when he'd show up in town, he'd have these giant nuggets of gold. Nobody ever knew where he got it. And I said, I think I found it. It's right. Look at the sand. Because in the sand, it's just like flecks of gold. Now, I watch Gold Rush. I know what gold looks like when it comes out. I'm like, it's right here. I can't believe these fools have never found it. I mean, to the point that I'm emptying my water bottle and I'm filling it with sand to bring it home. Because I have just found the secret to the riches that are going to change our entire life. Well, here's what I found out. The sand in the Superstitions is actually filled with gold mica, which is this granite that has decomposed over long periods of time. Looks a lot like gold. It ain't gold. I'd love to tell you I was a young man when I fell for this. I was 35 years old. I have no excuses. I should have known. But the problem is, here was the issue. What presented to me was something that I didn't have the knowledge or the wisdom to understand the difference about, and it actually filled something I wanted to be true so bad in my heart that I was willing to jump into it. Here's the answer to all of our problems, because we're just going to come out here every couple of weeks with a bottle and pick up some gold. It's going to be amazing. And I was a fool. This is a question that we have to wrestle with. Do you know wisdom when you see it? I thought I knew gold when I saw it. Turns out it wasn't gold. It kind of had the shape of gold. It kind of had the color of gold. It kind of appeared in a place that I would assume gold would be. And yet it was not gold at all. Would you know wisdom when you saw it? James doesn't rely on you just trying to figure it out. He tells you what it should look like. That's what he says. Wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. I mean, that's a pretty exhaustive list. There's a lot of stuff up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things to be looking for. Now, I want to be honest. If you had told me before going into this sermon, I want you to present a list of 8 things that wisdom should produce, that's probably not the list I would have came up with. Doesn't mean my list was wrong, but this list is not exactly the list I would have come up with. And I'm just going to invite you for like 10 seconds to look at it and think about which word in particular would you go, man, that one really kind of stands out to me. You don't have to say it, but just hold it in your heart right here. You got it? Because here's the one that stands out to me, submissive. Because there's a lot of things on that list that I go, well, I want to be pure, and I want to be peace-loving, and I want to produce good fruit, and I want to be sincere, and I want to be just. I totally get it, but submissive? Why do you have to get insulting, James? We have to remember, when we read the scriptures, what we are reading is an English translation of a language that is 2,000 years removed. And we often think that language translation is science, but it's really art. You have to kind of get to the essence of what the word is trying to say. And so this is the translation in the NIV translation, the New International Version, which is the one I teach out of every week. But there are other options. So here's what the ESV says. It says, you're open to reason. And the reason this is important to me, because what a shift, right? We just went from an insult to like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. Aaron, you're submissive. You want to take this outside? Aaron, you're open to reason. Thank you for seeing that in me, right? For whatever reason, submissive sounds like an insult, and yet open to reason sounds like thank you, thank you. I'm glad someone acknowledges it. But it's not just the ESV. Here's what the NASB says. It says reasonable. We've actually upped it. Now you're not just open to reason, you're actually a reasonable person. Man, this sounds great. Okay, now I like it. I'm good. I might not be submissive, but not only am I open to reason, I'm reasonable. And my favorite translation is the New King James that says, willing to yield. Actually, I take it back. It's not my favorite. I wish we had stayed with reasonable, because I like reasonable. Willing to yield kind of comes back around to submissive again. And if I'm being honest, if you know me as personally, being willing to yield is not something that I'm particularly known for. I hold strong opinions. I can be a little dogmatic. I will fight for what I think is right like crazy. And what James says is that if you want to see wisdom in someone's life, are they willing to yield and say, you know what, that's okay. I need to grow in that. I need to grow in that. Because the confession is, I have told myself that good leadership is standing up for what is right no matter the cost. It is defending your position no matter what. It's going at the bad guys, the enemy, whatever is unjust, and getting after it. And yet, how often in my life is that actually what's at stake? I mean, what's actually at stake is this point that means nothing. But I will defend it like I'm defending Europe in World War II. A just and mighty battle. Most of the time, it's just I don't want to be wrong. Am I willing to yield? Am I willing to be submissive? Am I willing to be open to reason? Am I open to being a reasonable person? Because this is what the deeds of people with wisdom look like. They're pure, they're peace-loving, they're considerate, they're submissive, they're full of mercy and good fruit, they're impartial, and they're sincere. So let's just practice the opposite. What are the deeds of people with false wisdom? Well, they're evil, they're division sowing, they're inconsiderate, they're aggressive, they're full of bitter envy and selfish ambition, they're unjust, and they're insincere. That just described the pulse of our culture. Who gets ahead in our world? Well, people who are unjust and aggressive and inconsiderate. Who wins? Who makes money? Who climbs the ladder? Those kinds of people. And therefore, there will be a temptation. This is what James is trying to get at, I think. He is saying there will be a temptation in you, deep inside, to see the outflow of that kind of life and say, I actually value that more than I value wisdom, because what they got is what I actually want. They have money and they have power and they have influence and nobody pushes them around. That's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of leader we need. I'm going to call it wise. Whew. James doesn't let us get away with it. James says that wisdom actually looks completely different than that. And then he sums it up by saying this, and those kinds of people, peacemakers, who sow in peace, will reap a harvest of money. Oh, wait, sorry, I misread that. Righteousness. So then that gets at the heart, like, what do we actually want in our life? The reason we had to define righteousness at the beginning is because, man, you're going like, okay, so if I lean into wisdom, if I lean into getting rid of selfish ambition and getting rid of bitter envy, if I lean into peacefulness, what will it give me? Will it also give me the thing that I really want? Will it give me power? Will it give me money? Will it give me a voice? Will it give me a platform? Nope, it's going to give you righteousness. Do you want it? Is that what you want in your life? Because my confession is not always. Sometimes I want to scoop up gold in the desert and say, here it is, I found it. It's going to answer my problems. It's going to give me the thing I need. Instead, he says, if you live this way, what you will produce, the crop that you will harvest, that you will have more than you can do with, is righteousness. You will then be living in right relationship with your God, your neighbor, his creation. You will be a kind of people who live honestly and faithfully and justly. And I want to be that kind of person. I want to be that kind of community, not just because it's a good thing to be, but it's what we were created to be. It is the mission of which you have been called. God did not come just to save you from the punishment of hell. He came to make you a new creature who lives righteously under his rule. That's what he called you to be. That's what you've been designed for. It's the teleos, it's the wholeness, it's the completeness, it's the perfection that James is aiming us for. The thing he's asking you to wrestle with right here, that I'm wrestling with, is how often is that the thing that I want to throw my whole life at? How often is that the thing that I am tempted to call wise? How often am I willing to confront the things in me that lead me in wisdom, but bring about disorder and all kinds of evil in my own life, in my own heart, and in my own community? I want to be the kind of person that represents God's righteousness to the world. And I know the only way to do that is to be made new through faith in Jesus Christ, and then to pursue right living under God's wisdom. And that can be hard, so we need to be on the lookout for where wisdom exists. Would you pray that God would help us to see it when it comes? God, we thank you so much for James. We thank you for his wisdom. We thank you for his insight. We thank you for the way he knows us as humans. We ask you that you would help us to transform, that you'd help us to see wisdom when it comes and transform us into the likeness of Jesus who we love. We pray this in his name. Amen.